Welcome back to LMI Podcast, everyone. This is Mac Pearley. We're back on Lawyers, Mediators International show and podcast where we talk about law and conflict resolution topics to educate both professionals and everyday people. We are back with Andy Semotiuk, who is a regular now on this podcast to discuss immigration and international law. He is an immigration lawyer who is licensed in New York, California, Ontario, British Columbia. So he's very knowledgeable on these topics, and he's also a contributing author on Forbes. And so you can go check out his articles. We're going to be checking one of his articles today, where he's been talking and writing about the recent events pertaining to the peace deal attempts that President Donald Trump has been trying to make with Vladimir Putin and President Zelensky of Ukraine. Welcome to the Lawyers and Mediators International show and podcast, where we discuss law and conflict resolution topics to educate both professionals and everyday people. Catch regular episodes on YouTube and anywhere you get your podcasts. Just remember, nothing in these episodes constitutes legal advice, so be sure to talk to a lawyer, as cases are fact-dependent. So today's topic is on Andy's recent article, and we're going to share the screen to get there. But first, Andy, how are you doing? And welcome back to the show.
Great, and I'm very happy to be back with you, Mac.
Yes, thank you. But before we, jump right in, any recent big announcements on your side in terms of all the global affairs? Because you're pretty big, in this world
Well,
of.
this business with Zelensky and with Putin and so on has occupied more than
I bet.
like 90% of my time in the last while. So I'm really happy to be able to share some thoughts about that.
Yes,
And
thank you.
I think it fits really well with I know your area is conflict management and
Yeah.
resolution.
Yes.
And boy, we got a real conflict here. So it kind of fits in with that topic and
Yes.
what you're working on.
Well, this past March, I was in Angers, France, and I had taken some time. I got family in Paris. And so when I went to France, it was for an international mediation conference. And of course, one of the biggest topics there was the quote unquote so-called mediation that President Trump was trying to do with Zelensky when Zelensky was in the White House. You might remember this. This is when people were very upset about the way Trump treated Zelensky because it was very disrespectful. The whole "you don't got the cards" that kind of thing, and people were like, "Hey, this is how we treat allies. This is wrong. This is." That sort of talk. And so many people around the world. So, of course, no surprise that when I was in Europe, the French took it very personal. And it was a topic I just remember. I was one of the only Americans there. So I just kind of kept my mouth shut. I didn't really say anything because, when you go abroad and you're an American, you're supposed to still represent your country, although you don't always agree with what, your leaders do. But long story short, that was the Trump Zelensky meeting. Recently, we had the Trump Putin meeting. And so, as somebody like you who has been observing all of this, from the very beginning, what are your thoughts? Why did you write this? This title is Zelensky and EU leaders to meet with Trump after dismal Alaska summit. So go ahead. The floor is yours. Educate us a little bit about, from your perspective, about this kind of conflict and what is on the table now.
Well, I love the way you introduced the subject,
Yeah.
being there's a mediation happening here. And Trump is the key guy trying to pull these people together and do whatever is possible in order to reach some kind of a solution to the war. So a little background on the war. The war's been going on since 2014.
Yes.
So it's 11 years. But most recently, Russia invaded Ukraine, like full-scale invasion, in 2022. So the full-scale invasion has been going on now for 3 years. Now, a little background can help us in terms of understanding the two sides to the war. On the Russian side, Putin, the leader of Russia, has declared, and in writing and in speeches, that he wants to occupy all of Ukraine because he feels Ukraine should be part of Russia, and the demise of the former Soviet Union was one of the greatest catastrophe of the last century. So his view is he wants to take over all of Ukraine because Ukrainians and Russians, in his view, are brothers, and really Ukrainians belong to part of Russia.
Yeah, we saw the Tucker Carlton interview, I recall.
On the other side, Zelensky takes the position that Ukraine is its own
Mhm.
country. The nation is a separate nation from Russia, and they don't want to be part of Russia. They want to be their own nation, leading their own life, which they have been since 1991, when the former Soviet Union fell apart. So, for over 30 years now, Ukraine has been an independent nation. So, because they can't agree, Putin decided to invade Ukraine to force Ukraine to become part of Russia. And in the course of that war, I mean, a lot of people died and so on. So, in my article, I focused on two things. One was the um, efforts made in Alaska by Trump as a mediator to try and solve this problem, and then also about the meeting in Washington with the EU leadership as part of the overall discussions. So let's take Alaska to start with, what happened there and why I called it a dismal Alaska summit.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah,
Okay,
no,
so
please
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Yeah.
You can start. And one thing I will jump in and say is two things. I hear the sentiment of Americans. Okay, I know a lot of what my countrymen feel on this. It's divided our country as well. I saw a recent CNN poll, I think, where a majority, I think 62%, I may be completely wrong about this, I believe just the other day, it was now the majority of Americans do continue to support the US aiding Ukraine and giving them weapons. This most of the cause comes from the fact that Americans just see Russia attacking civilians. Okay, Ukrainian cities, being burned, just constant bombardment, and so I think most Americans, regardless what the news might say, most Americans do support Ukraine and the fight that it's in to defend itself and its survival. At the same time, there are many Americans who are very upset about I guess, the bleeding or maybe the fleecing of America because we feel that, look, it's not our fight. We're across the ocean. We can't keep affording this. We have our own homeless problems, for example. We have a high suicide rate amongst veterans. That money needs to be staying in this country. So this is why it's become a very complicated discussion, between Americans going through this. So anyway, I just want to say that because I think sometimes we might make the good the enemy of the perfect, and Trump, people might say in this country, well, he's trying his best. He didn't start the war. At the same time, um, I know many feel that how he performed the other day was a little shameful, to a degree, especially the way he showcased Putin. But I'll let you go ahead and give me your
Okay.
thoughts and your points.
Well, I'm really glad you raised that. So let's ask, why the hell should America support Ukraine? Good question, right? And the answer is in an agreement that America signed in 1994. I've talked about this before.
Yes.
It's the Budapest Memorandum. In 1994, Ukraine had the third largest nuclear arsenal in the world, strategic and tactical nuclear weapons, as a result of the downfall of the Soviet Union and the split. And the issue was, are we going to worry about nuclear war? Is there something we can do to reduce the chances of a nuclear war? And what is it that we can do? And the parties got together: Russia, Ukraine, the United States, the UK, France, and China. And in that meeting in Budapest in 1994, they signed an agreement. And the agreement was, Ukraine, surrender all your weapons, all your nuclear weapons to Russia. And if you do, we, the United States and France and the UK and China, lesser France and the UK, but still part of the agreement. But we, the UK, the United States, and Russia, will honor and protect your sovereignty and independence. That was a solemn promise to avoid a nuclear conflict. It was not some kind of side deal, something to shuffle around on the table. It was a major event and a major commitment, first made by Ukraine, and then secondly by the other parties who signed the accords by promising or guaranteeing Ukraine's sovereignty. Now, there's a joke that comes up in my mind about this,
Yeah.
and it's, if you're eating bacon and eggs for breakfast, you might bear this in mind. What's the difference between a contribution and a commitment? Well, the difference is that the chickens made a contribution, but the pig made a commitment.
Hmm.
And in this case, Ukraine made the commitment of giving up all its nuclear arms. But the US in particular uh, made the promise that they will honor and support Ukraine's independence. So this is not charity we're talking about.
Yeah.
This is a major commitment made by the United States. So that being said, we go now to mediation and what can we learn about mediation from what happened? Well, first question, who should be at the table mediating a conflict between the Russian Federation and Ukraine, and who should be at the table? Well, the answer is all three parties should be at the table at the very least, I would say. Starting a mediation without the party that has to agree to the agreement doesn't make sense. So right off the bat in Alaska, there was a false note to the meeting. What is Trump doing meeting with Putin? And I'm asking that question for a good reason, because you got to understand, who is Putin? Putin is the leader of Russia, a country that has been a colonial empire for over 300 years. What is more, Putin, who's been in office for something like 20 years now and is an eternal president in Russia, it seems, has been responsible for the deaths of the following. Number one, of his own army, casualties and deaths in the 3-year invasion, over 1 million people. Number two, of the casualties and deaths on the Ukrainian side in the army, several hundred thousands. On the deaths of Ukrainian civilians, tens of thousands. On the abduction of Ukrainian children, tens of thousands. Now, he is an indicted by the ICC war criminal. And if you don't believe it, just watch Bucha on TV, Irpin on TV, and just watch what's going on in the on TV daily in terms of attacks on civilian targets. He's an indicted war criminal. And in the worst war, land war, in Europe since World War II. That being the case, was it suitable for Trump to greet him in the manner he was greeted? First of all, why is he greeting just Trump, but never mind, just Putin, but in this manner, red carpet, waiting for Trump to get off Putin to get off his plane, applauding as Putin comes towards him, greeting with a handshake and also with an embrace Putin as they meet, smiling for the cameras, walking together on the red carpet to the presidential limousine and taking him this indicted war criminal who has killed over what I mentioned, taking him in that car for a trip to have a meeting for 3 hours. What does that say to the world about Trump and America? What is America doing that? That's the first question. And then they spend 3 hours together talking. And at the end of the 3 hours, we do not get the result that Trump has indicated he must have in order for this to be successful, namely a ceasefire. A ceasefire of daily attacks, including on the day of the meeting, while they're sitting there talking, there's attacks of Russia on Ukraine. Not Ukraine on Russia, but on Russia on Ukraine. And by the way, the whole war could be over if Russia would just retreat from Ukrainian territories. Over completely. There would be no deaths. But because Russia's got troops in Ukraine and because Russia is dedicated to destroying Ukraine, we got this anomaly of no ceasefire, no progress, it seems, or little progress, if any, other than let's have another meeting between Trump and Zelensky in Washington. And that's basically the end of Alaska. And we watch, as we stand there watching as Putin gets on the airplane and flies off to his country, back to his country. Really? Assume Hitler came for a visit like that. Is that how we would conduct our affairs? Would that be the same way we would treat Hitler? I think, that's the vision. From the point of view of Ukraine, that's the vision that hurts. I mean, that just floors them. Later, there were Russian tanks invading Ukraine with US and Russian flags on the tanks as they're invading Ukraine. That's how far we've gone. This is a kind of a Munich where, for those who know history, basically Chamberlain came out of Munich, a meeting with Hitler, declaring there's peace in our time. But what it was is basically a surrender to Hitler of his desire to take over, the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia. It was just a appalling development. So that's it for Alaska. Now we go to Washington. Again, mediation-wise, consider this. The European Union's leadership, most of the major leaders from Europe, France, Germany, Norway, and so on, Italy, the EU leadership, NATO leaders, all came to Washington to attend the meeting between Trump and Zelensky. In terms of dealing with the previous meeting between Zelensky and Trump in the White House, that turned the meeting upside down, I would say, or it certainly made a difference in how the parties dealt with each other. And they again talked about peace. And after, a year, not a year, seemed like a year, exactly. A day or two of these meetings, and God bless them all of them for trying. You can't fault trying. But what did they come out with? Well, we can't have a ceasefire. All we can have is an effort to reach a peace agreement. Question is, now, do we need a peace agreement? Is that what this is all about? I'll give you a quick answer. No, and I'll tell you why. We've already had many peace agreements, 20 of them with Russia. They signed, starting with the UN Charter, through, Helsinki Accords, through 2 Minsk meetings, and Budapest, which I talked about already. They signed and promised to respect the territorial integrity of the nations and Ukraine, and he hasn't respected them. He hasn't respected any of the agreements. There's no need for an agreement. What's needed now is enforcement. Enforcement meaning ceasefire, stop the killing, which is what Trump has declared he wants, is to stop the killing. But how do you stop the killing? How do you reach an agreement? Or what do you do to get a ceasefire? Well, clearly Putin doesn't want a ceasefire. He doesn't want a ceasefire because he's trying to invade all of Ukraine. He wants to subsume all of Ukraine into Russia, and he can't afford a ceasefire. I'll tell you, there are several reasons why he can't afford a ceasefire. And forgive me, I don't want to be
No,
lecturing.
it's okay. No, you're good.
It's not a lecture, but I'm trying to summarize a lot of the.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. The first reason is because it seems every time Russia reached any kind of a conclusion to military conflict, there's been an overturn of the government involved. For example, even as far back as the Russian Revolution, the Tsar was trying to reach some sort of a peace deal, and it ended up that they had to kill the Tsar, and there was a revolt. So Putin is walking a tightrope in terms of his own leadership. Historically speaking, it's the cards are against him. When he talked to Zelensky saying that you don't have the cards, Putin doesn't have the cards to reach a peace agreement, because if he did, the likely scenario, judging by Russian history, is the upheaval of his government and goodbye Putin. Apart from that, Putin has been, for most of his time in office, he's been a dictator in Russia. And, people who disagree with him end up falling out of buildings and, reach all kinds of strange deaths.
Like Navalny.
Yeah. So there's a problem there. And he needs the war because he's been, he's basically expropriating people's assets, stealing them essentially, building up his fortune and the fortune of his buddies that are around him, to the expense of the Russian, ordinary salt of the earth people.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of disaffection in Russia, and the economy's on its skids. He's in trouble financially. He's got a hell of a burden financial to meet from day to day, paying all these soldiers for being on the front, and etc. So the way out of this mess is a ceasefire imposed on Russia, or if no ceasefire, then tariffs on countries such as China and India that are buying Russian oil and thereby financing Russia in the war. Brazil's another one like that. Heavy tariffs on these countries from the United States would be one thing. If we can't have a ceasefire, which Trump said he wants a ceasefire and he's going to impose sanctions if there is no ceasefire, but now he's backed off after meeting Putin for some reason I'm not clear about, but that's the way it is. So tariffs, heavy tariff sanctions on those people, another round of sanctions, which will lead economically to strangulation of the Russian economy, particularly if India and China stop buying oil and gas.
Yeah.
Now, you can ask, well, wait a minute, are we going to create a world war? I mean, a nuclear war here? And the answer is no. And here's the reason why. First of all, China said to Putin, no nuclear arms. None. We don't go for that. That's number one. Number two, so far, if nuclear arms were going to be resorted to, don't you think by now he would have resorted to nuclear weapons? Like, what's holding him back? The answer is he's never going to use nuclear weapons in a conflict like this. Yeah. And what's needed is now for his soldiers to get out of Ukraine. That's the defining end to the war. At least a preliminary end to the war would be get the soldiers out of all of Ukraine. Now, there's $300 billion or so Russian dollars in Western banks that have been frozen. And that money needs to be seized and sent to Ukraine for rebuilding the country and helping in the war effort. Now, Trump has said, well, listen, I'm not sending in troops into Ukraine to enforce a new peace deal. And we're back to enforcement. Listen, the US, the UK, and France were at the meeting, and Russia were all at the Budapest meeting. They said they're going to respect and enforce that agreement. So they want now Ukraine to accept another promise of enforcement, unlike, in some way, the one that they already promised and they're not living up to. They want Ukraine to live up to or agree to another agreement, which is buying time for Putin, is basically what's going on. He's trying to buy the time so that he can invade and get the army through, etc. And he has no other option. He's got to do something with this war. It was 3 days, 30 days, 60 days, 400, whatever it is, promised it would all be over. And here we are. Here's a funny little thought. A snail can walk in 3 years. I checked it out on ChatGPT. Check it out for yourself.
That's funny.
All across Ukraine in 3 years. But Putin's army is only at 18% of Ukraine today.
Mm.
That's how successful the war has been for Russia. Don't forget, this is 11 years. It's not just 3, 11 years. So that's the way forward, I think. And if we ever get rid of this guy and the world changes, it may very, if Trump wants a Nobel Prize, give him the Nobel Prize, but do what he needs to do. Win the damn war, and not by asking NATO to pay for arms from the United States to be given to Ukraine. No, you signed the Budapest memorandum. It's your job to pay, not because you signed the memorandum and you have to pay. That's part of it. It's because Ukraine is fighting the war not for itself, but for all countries. If we give in on this territory, that's why all those European leaders were in Washington, is they knew that if you give in on this border clash and allow a big power to break through and take a country without consent and without agreement, it's the beginning of a war, world war. Who's next? I'll tell you who's next. Poland is next. The Baltic countries are next. Romania is next, and so on, out through to Europe. What's next? If things go the way they are, I'll tell you where we're going. There's going to be a massive exit of Ukrainians from Ukraine. It's projected that as many as 20 million people may flee if Ukraine falls to the Russians. Where are they going? Into Europe. What's Europe going to do with 20 million refugees? It's going to destabilize all of Europe. What happens when Europe gets destabilized? They're going to call on America to help. There's no end to this thing. America's going to get dragged into this war. So help me, God. If this war continues, we're going to see American soldiers feet on the ground in Europe. There's just no other way. Or we contain Russia, at the very least, by getting their soldiers out of Ukraine. But more after that, have Russia help in the effort to restore Ukraine's economic well-being along with the West. And a change needs to happen in Russia to convert it into some sort of a Western-style democratic, semi-democratic, if not fully democratic country, which will really help in terms of the economics in the West. And so, one final comment.
Good.
Right now, Russia let's put it this way. Trump thinks he's got all the levers. He makes the decisions. He can make, war, peace, etc. But he doesn't have all the levers. Right this year, the United States has a $9 trillion debt coming due. $9 trillion. And 20% of the overall debt of the United States, which is now in the 30s,
Yeah.
30 trillion, is owned by Europe. Something like 25%, something like that. Not to mention Japan, that owns a huge chunk of the American debt. All that has to happen is for Europe or Japan or both to have second thoughts about carrying the debt, because America's so insulting in terms of how they're treating their allies and how they're conducting themselves. All they have to do is start thinking about, well, should we buy any further debt from America? It could be a catastrophe for America and in turn for Europe and for Japan and everybody else. Because if America starts rocking economically, that's going to go all over the world.
Yeah.
So that's the scene as I see it right now.
Well, thank you. I appreciate all of it. And of course, because of time, I would never be able to go, point by point on all these issues and have you, clarify and address some things. I think on the debt issue, yeah, to a lot of Americans, many people feel that it is a national security issue and that we're partly mortgaging our children's future because we have so much debt. And yeah, any country could then come demanding, payment because we just raised the debt, ceiling recently again. This is what we keep doing. We keep borrowing and printing, and it's not good fiscally long term. There's no country that can survive this kind of thing. So I think that's another reason, actually, why many Americans are so, look, we got to pull back. We can't keep funding. But at the same time, I do concede your point, and that is there was a deal, right? The U.S., Bill Clinton specifically, the U.S. was to help protect Ukraine. And it was I think, I think they call it a trilateral agreement. I don't know enough about international law and diplomacy to confirm whether or not it was ratified by the Senate to where it is an official treaty of the U.S. Um, but but I'll leave it up to the people in D.C. to figure that out. I do agree with India and China, being the critical junctures in all of this. They buy a lot of oil from Russia, and that's basically how Russia fuels this, war machine, right? Um, in the U.S., we've talked about the secondary tariffs. If we apply it to India, if we apply it to China, and make them feel the pain, they're going to be less tempted to want to use and buy Russian oil, which should then indirectly impact Putin's war machine. But do you think that would work in a way that wouldn't hurt the U.S. economy? Because the tariffs were controversial to begin with, by Trump, and a lot of Americans were concerned that it's going to bring prices up. For us, we talk about the price of eggs and the whether kids are going to get gifts during Christmas because all of our stuff's made in China. And so I don't know if we're going to have a lot of buy-in from Americans, wary about putting tariffs on some of our biggest trading blocks because it's going to then come back, on us economically. So it may be selfish and it may be just Americans looking out for themselves when it comes to their plastic goodies, but it is a concern.
Here's a quick answer to that.
Mm.
Tell China, listen, buy our oil and gas. We'll give you whatever you need. Cut out Russia.
Yeah.
No tariffs.
So, well, it shows, it makes the point that I think someone from the Trump administration was saying recently, and that is tariffs are a means of international diplomacy.
Mhm.
Most Americans only see it as an economic thing, right? International economics, in order to not get taken advantage of. And if you tariff us, we tariff you, that kind of thing. But there's a certain amount of coercion involved where you can hopefully get what you want, out of it, assuming that you're the stronger power, right? And you have some leverage, which the United States, obviously is in that area. So we'll see. I think India is much closer that I think it would work on India a little bit easier
Yeah,
than on the Chinese, because I think they have their own interests that align with Russia. But um, it's always complicated. But I appreciate that you're at least giving solutions, because Andy, a lot of times people, when we talk about this topic, there's criticism of Trump, but then they don't offer, well, what would you do, or what?
yeah,
Because I think a lot of Americans give Trump a lot of benefit of the doubt because they're like, listen, guys, we have a lot of bad options here. There are no good options that are easy. If otherwise, if they existed, we would have done it a long time ago. And I'm glad what you said about Putin. The reason he didn't use nuclear weapons, because we were thinking about this a couple of years ago.
yeah,
This is this guy crazy enough to go there? But from the Russian perspective, the Ukrainian perspective, the American perspective, there are not a lot of good answers.
yeah,
And so, what Trump did, I think even his detractors the other day would have been like, well, it's better to talk than not talk. Because can we do 2 more years of this? You know, so um, secondary tariffs, as you said, and put the pressure on these countries not to buy Russian oil and get strict on the tariffs so that they can have the intended impact.
yeah,
And hopefully, time's on our side when it comes to Putin, because I mean the guy's not gonna live forever.
yeah.
Because this war is not against everyday Russians, right? This is against a madman. It's one
It's a
person.
good summary, Mac, that you've made. I think you're like on the money in terms of what you're talking about. And, you know, we'd like for things to be done better, but
Mhm.
even if they're not being done better, at least some things, they're trying somehow to. Let's hope that what they do, like with European leaders and the unity there that you saw, maybe there's some hope there that the people. By the way, I might just mention that
Yeah,
Macron especially was extraordinary those
yeah,
discussions. Very, you can see the leadership there from him,
yeah.
which I was really happy
Oh
to
yeah,
see.
no, he was. I was following some of his comments just over a year ago, where he was talking about European land army,
Yeah,
not just NATO, not just French military or the German, no, but a European one to rival Russia. And so, yeah, who would have thought, the French were going to become the hawks? But all right, Andy, as good as always to hear from you, and thank you so much for the article. We'll put it on this blog post. We'll put about this video, and so it'll
yeah.
be published very soon to our
Okay.
socials.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, everyone, take care. Thanks for stopping by on lmipodcast.com. Until next time, take care. Bye bye.